Frenkie de Jong is probably Barcelona's most controversial player. Some Barcelona fans consider him to be the best midfielder in the world, while others still don't get why Barcelona haven't just sold him. And to be honest, most Barcelona fans don't know what to think of him and constantly change their mind about him, which is nothing more than logical. Frenkie de Jong has had periods where he was Barcelona's best player. I mean, the whole 22-23 season, the start of last season, there he was absolutely brilliant. Nevertheless, he's also had some lesser periods, some big games in which he didn't perform, and especially in the more recent seasons, also injury problems. So by the time this summer came around, there were a lot of doubts surrounding Frenkie de Jong. With his injury history, with the rumors about his high salary and with the depth Barcelona had in midfield, it didn't even seem like a bad idea to just sell him. But Barcelona kept Frenkie de Jong, and now under Hansi Flick, it is time for him to silence the haters for once and for all. He has already played some minutes under Hansi Flick in Barcelona's most recent games, but after the international break, Frenkie will be truly back. And he'll be one of the scariest midfielders in the world in this current Barcelona team. In this video, we'll see why that is. So let's just get right to it. Okay, before we talk about where in this midfield Frenkie de Jong can fit in, we might have to talk about Hansi Flick's midfield structure. As you probably know, he doesn't just play with one single pivot like Barcelona have always done with Busquets. He plays with a double pivot of two midfielders. One of these two plays in a deeper role and really drops deep during the build-up. This player was usually Marc Bernal at the start of the season, and after his injury, Marc became the main player for this role. Even Eric Garcia has managed to become a reliable option for Hansi Flick as that deep midfielder. Then the other midfielder is more of a box-to-box midfielder who serves as the glue between defense and attack and also makes runs forwards. That player has usually been Pedri or Marc as well. And thirdly, there is the attacking midfielder, a role perfect for players like Dani Olmo and Fermin Lopez. But Frenkie de Jong will never play as the attacking midfielder under Hansi Flick. At least, I think so. The big question is, where would you put Frenkie de Jong in that double pivot? That's actually a really straightforward question to answer, because back in 2019 at Ajax, Frenkie de Jong played in a similar midfield structure. He played in a double pivot next to Lasse Schöne, while Donny van de Beek was the attacking midfielder. Here, Frenkie de Jong was the deeper one out of the two. He dropped deep in between the center backs to help make the play from behind. That was a position where he flourished. He became famous playing in this role. He ran rings around Luka Modric in that one game against Real Madrid. That's basically the version of Frenkie de Jong that made Barcelona sign him. Now, ever since he has signed for Barcelona, he hasn't really played in the same role. At Barcelona, because of Busquets, who was Barcelona's single pivot, Frenkie de Jong has had to play in a more advanced position as a box-to-box midfielder. But that's also a role that suits him actually. Under Ronald Koeman back in 2021, he even played some games as a centre-back. But I don't think Hansi Flick will ever think of going down that route. So long story short, Frenkie de Jong can play as that deep midfielder like he did at Ajax, but he can also play as more of that box-to-box midfielder, and that's a role that he's had in most of his games at Barcelona. So to come back to the question, where would you put Frenkie de Jong in the Hansi Flick midfield? Well, you can put him in both positions really, just like Marc. Ideally though, he's probably at his best as that deeper midfielder. He's the one who drops deep in between the defenders to pick up the ball and make those runs with the ball into open spaces, or to play those long balls. But some people might still be skeptical of Frenkie de Jong as that deep player. And why? Well, his defending. Frenkie de Jong is notorious for being defensively not as solid as players like Gavi, Christensen, Eric Garcia or even Marc. That's one of the reasons why he has never managed to flat out replace Sergio Busquets. It's not just about tackling or intercepting the ball though, it's about positional freedom. Frenkie de Jong at his best is everywhere. He roams. And that's not what a typical defensive midfielder is supposed to do. So again, that's why you don't want him to be a single pivot like Busquets. But Hansi Flick doesn't play with a single pivot in his midfield. In that double pivot system, Frenkie de Jong is not alone. There is a midfielder next to him who can make up for the space he leaves while roaming. When Frenkie de Jong runs into an open space with the ball, the other midfielder can cover that space that he left for him, so that Barcelona are still defensively solid. That is why Frenkie de Jong would make sense as that deep double pivot midfielder. However, it's more complicated than that, because you cannot just put Frenkie de Jong next to any midfielder. Think about a Frenkie de Jong-Pedri double pivot for example. Would that work? Pedri would have to cover the space left by Frenkie, but to be honest, Pedri is defensively just as much of a liability as Frenkie de Jong. Playing Pedri and Frenkie de Jong together only works if Pedri is the attacking midfielder. So who would that other double pivot midfielder be? Well, Gavi. And apparently in Barcelona's latest training sessions, Hansi Flick has been experimenting with a Gavi de Jong double pivot. This idea just makes sense. Gavi is a defensive monster who's not afraid of covering some extra ground during a game. Gavi is just perfect for covering up that space that Frenkie de Jong leaves when he is roaming with the ball. And in itself, this position is just great for Gavi. He's press resistant and his positioning is really smart, so he would be the perfect connection between defense and attack. So Barcelona's ideal midfield this season might be a De Jong Gavi double pivot with Dani Olmo as the attacking midfielder. Whoa, I hear you say. What about Pedri? What about Marcasado? They've literally both been world-class up till now under Hansi Flick, so wouldn't they have to play in Barcelona's ideal midfield? Honestly, yeah, they're both obviously good enough, but the same can be said for Gavi and Frenkie de Jong. When everyone is fit, Barcelona simply have an insane amount of quality in midfield. Hansi Flick literally has multiple world-class midfields. He can go with Gavi, De Jong and Dani Olmo, he can replace Olmo with Pedri and go with Gavi, De Jong, Pedri, he can go with Marcasado, Pedri and Dani Olmo, he can go with Gavi, Marcasado and Dani Olmo, he can go with Marcasado, De Jong and Pedri. There's just tons of options, and in the big games there will always have to be someone who's on the bench. I mean, we've not even mentioned Fermín López at all up till now, but he's almost too good to be benched as well. When everyone is fit, Barcelona really just have two completely different elite midfields. Frenkie de Jong, Gavi, Dani Olmo, and Marcasado, Pedri, Fermín López. It doesn't really matter what combination you pick. The depth is just insane, and Frenkie de Jong is ideally that deep playmaker, but he can also play as that box-to-box midfielder. Also, if you take into account how many games there are during the season, it is probably a good thing that there's this much depth. Because last time when Frenkie de Jong came back from injury, Barcelona were lacking quality in midfield, so they rushed him back, which is arguably the reason why he suffered a relapse injury back in April. Now though, they don't necessarily need him, the midfield is good enough without him as well. And you know what that means? Frenkie de Jong's injury problems might actually be over right now. There's finally no pressure anymore to rush these players back, and with a fit Frenkie de Jong for the rest of the season, only God knows how far Barcelona can really get. Of course, this also applies to other players. Dani Olmo, Gavi, Pedri, now that they don't have to be rushed back, their chances of getting injured are just way smaller. They will also be rested way more often, so when the big games in March and April come around, Barcelona will probably be at their strongest. That's just all a positive consequence of having this kind of depth and quality in midfield. So that was it for today's 5 years at Barcelona. Frenkie de Jong has gained many fans and many haters. It's undeniable that he's one of the most talented midfielders in the world, but even after all of these years at Barcelona, there are still many fans doubting him. And deservedly so, cause to be fair, Frenkie de Jong sucks. And why? Well, let's find out. Okay, I might need to explain that previous video on Frenkie de Jong before I leave. Obviously, I've changed my mind on him now. But what was that video even about? Well, the message basically was that it wasn't really a bad idea to sell Frenkie de Jong. And to be honest, back in August, it actually wasn't a bad idea. Mind you, back then Gundogan was still at Barcelona. It seemed to make more sense to keep Gundogan because Gundogan is extremely versatile, Gundogan has never had any injury problems, and Gundogan didn't earn the same wages that Frenkie de Jong was earning. And selling Frenkie de Jong would have probably generated a lot of money. Footballing wise, Frenkie de Jong under Hansi Flick was always going to be a great fit. This was more about the financial side of things. And if you think about it, Frenkie de Jong is 27. He's still young enough to be worth a lot of money, while also not having the same kind of potential that the likes of Pedri and Gavi have in terms of age. It made sense to want to sell him, but does Frenkie de Jong suck? Obviously not. He's one of the best midfielders in the world, and Hansi Flick might just be the perfect manager to get the best out of him. Mind my words, Frenkie de Jong is probably about to enter his prime right now, and it will be at Barcelona. I think it is now time for him to finally put an end to doubters like me and to finally convince everyone for once and for all. He's always been a controversial player, and like a lot of Barcelona fans, I've had moments where I was in favor of him and moments where I was really skeptical. But now that he's still at Barcelona for this season and the Hansi Flick can get the best out of him, it's time to unleash his final version. Prime Frenkie de Jong. Please Hansi Flick, let it happen. So that was actually it for today's video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and feel free to share your own opinion on Frenkie de Jong in the comments down below. And of course, Força Frenkie de Jong, Força Barça, and have a good day.